Hi, my name is V, and today I'm going to briefly go over how to choose between a visual novel and an interactive fiction format for your indie game. If you've watched my previous videos, you may know that I currently am writing an interactive fiction, but that I originally was going to go with a visual novel. The reason that I chose not to do that is because of some things I'm going to go over today. So let's get started. This is the page for my interactive fiction, and I'm going to jump back to this in a minute. But as you can see, it's a lot of writing, just like interactive fictions are a lot of writing. Now, I do want to show you two examples of visual novels. The first one we're going to look at it briefly is Imperial Grace. This is a game that I really enjoy playing. It has great writing and it has great visuals. Mainly in this part of the game that you're seeing from these screenshots is the dialogue areas, but visual novels often have CGs, also known as character graphics, as well. And I'm going to show you another game in just a moment that has some of those. As you can see, though, there's not a lot of writing, but there's a lot of visuals. So now let's look at Oathbreaker. This is a very popular visual novel, and from the screenshots here, you'll be able to see the CGs, for example, and it does have a little bit of dialogue there as well. But it's very visual based. You don't need to have the player try to figure out what the description is or have in-depth writing for that. It's very, very vivid, as you can see. Now, going back to my game, you can see there is very little visual. I have some color scheme that I've put there. I've put a logo for my game. We have a menu, but it's a lot of writing. And I use some bold. We have choices. There is some colored text where people can choose to change the sentences to change certain things like their skin tone or their hair. But there's not really any visuals because it's not a visual novel. Personally, I chose not to go this route because it wasn't sustainable for me, and I'm going to go over why it may not be sustainable for you or why it may be sustainable for you. So, if you're considering creating a visual novel, here are the main pros and cons that I could think of. Pro would be that players are usually willing to pay more for a visual novel because a lot more work has to go into it because it has the visuals. Not to say interactive fiction is not a lot of work because it is, but typically a visual novel has to have the visuals. They have music. They have a separate coder, a separate writer, an editor, and a lot of times they use Kickstarter. Which one of the pros on here as well, even though I'm skipping one, is it's easier to get funding via Kickstarter. People are really interested in visual novels, so they're willing to give money. They're willing to donate money to hopefully get your game created. Another pro is that it is a shorter storyline and there are fewer choices that are needed for a complete game. So if you're wanting, to spend less time to create your game, this is a good route to go. For cons, unless you can write, create the art, do the coding, create the music, or you're able to outsource that or form a team, it is going to be difficult. So you're either going to have a one-man show and you have to be able to do all that or outsource it, or you need to form a team. Sometimes you can form a team with other people who will work for free, or other times you have to pay for it, which is sometimes where the Kickstarter comes in. Now, another con is that players typically, not always, but they usually have less control over characterization. This could both mean physically and personality wise. It could mean a lot of different things, but some players are not a fan of that, and so they may be turned off by that idea. And that is why some players prefer interactive fiction because they have that opportunity to have more control over whether their character has scars or tattoos, whether their character is more sarcastic or bolder. Whereas with a visual novel, things can sometimes be more set in stone. There are visual novels out there that allow you to change the way that your character is going to look and things like that, but they do have some constraints. Like they can't account for everything. So that is just something to keep in mind depending on how you want to go. Now, when it comes to creating interactive fiction, it has its own pros and cons. I'm very well aware of this since I am creating an interactive fiction. I actually have a second one in the works as well. In terms of pros, with the current tools and templates that are available, you really only need to be able to write to begin. If you are able to write a story and be descriptive about it, and it's okay if you need to improve, but if you're able to write, it's very accessible compared to visual novel creation, in my opinion. Another pro would be that, per the above point, it is easier to do it by yourself. So if you're someone who is considering, that you're not going to be able to outsource certain things, you're not going to have money for that, or you don't want to deal with fundraising, you just want to work by yourself, or you think that you are capable of working by yourself, whether or not you want to, then this is a better route to go, or it can be a better route to go. The writing does require deeper thought because your player relies on it for visualization. So that is something else to keep in mind. Another pro is that players usually have more control over characterization, and this can entice a lot of people to want to play your game. You can give them the option to have 20 different scars or 10 different tattoos. You can give them the option to have, a sarcastic rating or a flirty rating or however you want to play with personalities. There is a lot more options to do that, which can make for more unique gameplay, in my opinion. But it also has its cons, which is why I have it listed as the last bullet on the cons. And the cons can be two things in my experience. One, it is a con that people sometimes are going to come to you and say, "Can you add this to the game? Can you allow this to the game?" It does become overwhelming, and you really have to be able to set boundaries for players and say, "Hey, I don't have the capacity to do that. I may consider in the future, or it's not a part of my story and it's not really something that is going to be able to be added. I apologize for that." But you really have to be able to set those boundaries because it can get very overwhelming and it can kind of make you sometimes feel like you are, failing as a developer because you're not able to keep up with what the players want. But that's not true. It's just a feeling that you may have. So that's something to keep in mind. Another con of allowing them to have so much characterization, effect on characterization, is that it does require a lot of coding. So whether or not you're learning new to code new, and like I said, there are a lot of templates and tools available. The coding can be a lot because there's going to be errors. You have to find those and fix those. When you have a game that's literally like 10% complete and you have 80,000 words and you have to figure out where the errors are, it can be very stressful and time consuming. So that is something to keep in mind when it comes to the characterization aspect. There are, of course, other cons for writing an interactive fiction game. Players usually won't pay as much for your game, so if monetization is something that you're concerned about, this may not be the right route for you. Just to add on to that, the visual novel and interactive fiction communities are often put together. They do have their own separate communities, but a lot of people play both of them. That said, those people are very dedicated, but they're also not a large majority of gamers out there. It's not like Xbox or PlayStation or PC games outside of this type of content. So there isn't a lot of, room to actually make like a huge profit anyway. But just so that you know, it is less profitable, in my opinion, based on my experience, than creating a visual novel. That said, you're also unlikely to get any sort of funding. People are, instinctually they want to give more when they see visuals. And sure, you can have visuals created by an artist, but they're not going to be in the game. And so people may be less inclined to, provide money for that. So if you do want to go this route, I wouldn't try to do it by getting any sort of funding because it's unlikely to happen. And finally, you don't have the same visual boost to entice players, so your writing must do it. There is no room for mediocre writing. There will be some people that play the game, but they will be very harsh with their criticism. So it's really important that you practice your writing, that you are constantly trying to improve your writing, and that you have people to read over it. You have beta readers like I have. You have people to give you feedback so you can improve. Your writing is never going to be perfect. I'm a writer and I have been for over a decade. My writing can always improve though, and it will still continue to improve. So if you believe that, well, my writing is not good, I shouldn't do it, that's not what I'm saying at all. You can absolutely start. I'm just saying you need to be open to remember that you do need to take feedback and remember that it's not there to hurt you. It's there to help you improve so that people will want to play your game because there isn't a visual aspect and you need to draw them in with your story and, with your storyline, your plot, you need to be able to draw people in and keep their attention. So we've discussed pros and cons of visual novels, and these are just the ones that I was able to come up with based on about my 2 years of experience as an indie game developer. There's definitely other pros and cons out there, and some people may not view some of them as pros or cons. It may be flipped for them or vice versa. But if you're trying to decide which one, just a quick checklist is that for visual novels, if you can afford to outsource or are able to form a team, or you think that you can do all of that by yourself that you need to for the game, then it may be the right route for you. Also, if you want to monetize your game, as I mentioned, neither one of them is going to make you rich. That's just the truth because it's not a AAA game. But if you are more interested in making sure that you do have some sort of income from it at some point, a visual novel is probably the route to go. And then finally, if you have a very specific vision visually and want to ensure that it's delivered to players that way, then I would recommend a visual novel because on the flip side of that, interactive fiction does leave it open to interpretation in some ways. If you care more about writing a deep and descriptive story that paints a beautiful picture with words, then interactive fiction may be the route for you to go. This is also a great route if you want to work by yourself or with a very small team. Large teams can make things complicated with the interactive fiction because you don't have different elements really to work on. You're going to have to share the writing with someone else or the editing or ideas, and that can cause a lot of conflict. So it's not really recommended, in my opinion. Also, if monetization is not a priority. Now, people do make money off interactive fiction, and I'll probably talk about that in another video about different platforms you can use, but it shouldn't be a priority with interactive fiction because it's going to be slow money. It's not going to be a lot of money at once, and it's going to be slow money. And finally, if you don't mind leaving some things to the player interpretation, this would be a good option for you. Because you don't have visuals, you're not going to be able to say, hey, this is exactly how things are, and players will interpret things how they want. So that's that. I hope that this video was educational or at least informative for you. If you liked it, please subscribe for more content coming soon, and definitely leave a comment and let me know your thoughts.